Are you the friend who's always being asked for health advice? Now imagine turning that passion into a fulfilling career with our Become a Nutrition Coach program. Step into a world where your enthusiasm for wellness becomes the heart of your own thriving business. With me as your professor and guide and coach on our user-friendly digital platform, you can learn from anywhere at your very own pace. It's perfect for your busy life. Envision empowering others to live their healthiest lives, all while growing a career you love. You're not just gaining a certification here, you're joining a community of like-minded professionals ready to support and celebrate with you every step of the way. So what are you waiting for? It's time to nourish your future and help change lives, including your own. Head over to nutritiouslife.com/BNC for a free class and a sneak peek of the program. Your journey to becoming a nutrition coach begins now. If you've ever asked yourself, but how much protein do I really need? Or how much weight training do I really need to do to build muscle? Then this episode is for you. Welcome back to Living a Nutritious Life. I'm Keri Glassman, your host, and in today's episode, I'm chatting with my friend, Dr. Rachele Pojednic. Rachel is the CEO and founder of Strong Process Education and the Director of Scientific Research at Restore Hyperwellness. She holds a faculty appointment at Stanford University and is a research associate at the Institute of Lifestyle Medicine at Harvard Medical School. She received her PhD in nutritional biochemistry from Tufts University, and her current research examines nutrition, supplementation, and physical activity interventions on muscle physiology, performance, and recovery. Rachel was recently a speaker at our Nutritious Life Masterclass, and she shared so much incredible insight that I wanted to get her onto the podcast to share some of that insight with all of you. I think this episode is really going to resonate with many of you, especially those of you who've been looking to build strength. We discuss topics such as what types of protein to consume, misconceptions in fitness, the benefits of resistance training, and tips to avoid overtraining. I think you're going to love it. Please, as always, remember to rate, review, and share the podcast. Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to Living a Nutritious Life. I'm Keri Glassman, a celebrity registered dietitian nutritionist. Join me every Tuesday on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms as I bring in some heavy hitters to share the latest in nutrition and wellness science. We dive deep into food, sleep, stress, relationships, and so much more. Your weekly guide to a happier, healthier, more nutritious life. Hello, Rachel. I am so excited for this conversation today.
Same. I'm so excited to be invited to talk to you. We have so much to talk about.
I know. It was funny going into this. I was thinking about some of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I was already thinking, oh, we already need a part two. We haven't even started, and we started part one, and we need a part two because I know, we're just going to have so much to talk about, and I know that my listeners are going to eat up everything you have to say today. So let's just dive in first with, I want you to give everyone, I just did a little intro on you, but I would love for you to give a little bit of your background because you have this really interesting background of nutrition and exercise science and aging. And I feel like you're this beautiful intersection of knowledge on those topics. And I'd love for people to know a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, it's pretty circuitous, honestly. And I think this is probably pretty common for people in these fields, is you realize where all the intersections are and you kind of follow them throughout your career.
Right.
So I actually started in exercise pretty specifically way back in the day. So I've been a part of the sort of wellness fitness space since I was 18 years old. I was a personal trainer. I'm going to date myself, way back in Bally's Total Fitness, right? So I started way back then.
You can't possibly date yourself more than me, so don't worry about
it. So started there and then started to realize that exercise blends with nutrition blends with all these other healthy behaviors. And so I got my degree in Boston. I like to make the joke I've either gone to or taught at all of the schools in Boston. And so I got an undergrad degree at Northeastern in exercise physiology. Worked in the exercise space for quite some time, was coaching for a while, was teaching, and then went back to school for nutrition at Tufts. And really
Go
started to
Tufts, go Tufts. I
go Tufts,
I
yeah.
gotta give a little jumbo shout out.
And really started to think about, when I was at Tufts, healthy aging. So that's where,
Mhm.
I was really thinking about wellness and fitness up until that point. And then pivoted. I was in the nutrition, exercise, physiology, and sarcopenia lab there.
Yep.
So, muscle has kind of been my red thread, and really started to think about, oh, shoot, like what happens when we get older, if we are not, following these behaviors, exercise, nutrition. And so did that for several years, looked at vitamin D and skeletal muscle, and, really started to think about supplementation. And then started to teach at university, and I was teaching at Simmons, and looking at how we actually get this information across. So I was working with the Institute of Lifestyle Medicine at Harvard, which is where I did my postdoc, and bringing all of that information into how do dietitians, exercise physiologists sort of fit into the landscape here. And then COVID hit, and we actually left Boston. We went up to Vermont for a couple of years, and I started working at a military college, which kind of sounds like it's out of left field. But what it really turned into is, again, pivoting back into this wellness space, into human performance, into
Mhm.
longevity. And when we look at these war fighters and we look at first responders like firefighters, they are actually suffering from the diseases that we are most concerned about at accelerated rates because of the exposures that they have. And so this is where everything really started to tie together for me. And it started to become really obvious. Hey, if you can understand how performance works and how to optimize, you can start to recognize where things break. And if
Right.
you recognize where things break, there's an intervention point for you, right? And so that kind of brought me into this next iteration. We just moved to the West Coast. I'm now at Stanford University. And I'm also working in industry with a company called Restore Hyperwellness. And so I've kind of gone back to this route of bridging the gap between the wellness and fitness industry and academia and research, and trying to bring these two worlds together so that real people get really good information. So a little circuitous, but really landed kind of right back where I started, which is, how do we communicate really good science to the people that need it most?
Oh, I love it so much. I mean, you are just speaking my language. I mean, at Nutritious Life, and you were just at our masterclass speaking there. And so I know you know what Nutritious Life is all about. I mean, that's what we've always tried to do is get out information that is accurate and accessible and actionable. And that's what we try to do on this podcast here, which is also one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you here, because there is no one better than you to talk about the information we're talking about today, and no one who will present it better, because this is what you are also an expert in, is getting that information out to people in a way that they can really use it. And again, just so speaking my language there. I want to begin talking to you about a topic that is on everyone's mind, especially midlife women right now, which is protein. So when it comes to protein, there has been, the recommendations that have been around for a very long time to the recommendations that are now more popular based on recent research, which those recommendations are more than double than what we used to see. And where are you at with all of this, and what do you recommend? Of course, it's personalized. We know that. I always talk about personalized nutrition, but in general, going back to that 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight to the 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, where do you fall on that spectrum of recommendations?
Yeah. I mean, zero point 0.8 grams per kilo is kind of like the basement, the
Totally,
foundation, right?
totally
So
agree. Totally
yeah.
agree.
So that's really where, if you're getting below that, you're in trouble, right? Like that, we already recognize that. I think that's
Absolutely.
way back in the day when I first started studying aging, and this from your dietetics training, is when we look at older adults, we automatically see that the protein requirements increase to 1.2 grams per kilo or higher, because we want to maintain skeletal muscle mass. We want to make sure that all of your organs have the building blocks. Even bones use protein, right? And so we need to make sure that we have all of the things that we need. And we recognized, 15, 20 years ago that zero point 0.8 was not enough, particularly in an aging population. Bring us to today, and we're starting to look at, as you just mentioned, females and women in particular, right? And one of the things that we know about this population is that we lose muscle mass pretty
Right.
rapidly after the age of 30. After the age of 30, we are losing 3 to 5% of our muscle every decade,
Wow.
And so what we see is, probably not huge issues in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, because the declines are like, a little bit less muscle. I might have some aches and pains. Things might not be going as well. Oh, I must just be getting older. And then all of a sudden you hit 50, 60, 70, and we're seeing, your health is just kind of falling off a cliff because you didn't recognize that you were right at the edge for so long.
Right.
And
But
so,
yeah, it's all, sorry, just to interject for 1 second there. But what's scary about that is so many people are not even thinking about their health or how much protein they're getting or weight training in their 20s. They're not thinking about that until sometimes the first time people think about it is when they're trying to lose baby weight and maybe they're mid 30s, or maybe they're 40 and they are having a little aches and pains. But so many people, they're not thinking about building for the future when you're in that decade of your 20s. So all of a sudden you start losing when you're 30 and you haven't even started thinking about getting healthy yet. That's what I think is scary there. I mean, and we know, we always talk about that, like what you do in your 20s and your 30s is going to help you in your 50s and 60s. And so like you have to think about that. But I think so many people just don't consider that. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we can even pivot that conversation, particularly with women, to bone, right? So when you look at bone, and muscle and bone go hand in hand. And that's, interestingly, bone is how I got into muscle. I'll tell you that story in a second. But when we look at bone in women, your peak bone mass is in your early 20s.
Yeah,
So
I remember that was one of the things when I was getting my master's in clinical nutrition. I remember when I learned that I was 20. How old was I when I went back to get my master's? 24. And I remember thinking, like, I thought of myself as a kid. I was like, how could anything start, how could anything start declining at this age? I'm still a kid. I thought of myself as so young. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really scary.
Yep. And when we look at peak bone mass, we mean it, right? Peak bone mass is your bone density gets, as a female, it gets more and more dense until you are in your early to mid 20s. And that's all you get. There is no way to increase bone mass after that. The only sort of lever that you have to pull is to maintain.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So thinking about this really early is critically important. And this is how I got into muscle. It was really fascinating. I remember in a lecture at Tufts, we were learning about calcium and we were learning about bone and vitamin D. And the lecturer at the time was talking about how so many older folks fall and they break bones, right? Because their bones are brittle and they don't have calcium, D, they haven't laid down enough bone, they haven't maintained. And I raised my hand and I was like, it's really interesting. But why are they falling in the first place?
Right.
Like, why are they actually not able to catch themselves? And so I kind of unwound that a little bit. And what we found way back in the day, now like 15 or so years ago, is vitamin D not only plays a critical role in your bone, but also plays a critical role in muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I started to go down the muscle train. And this is to come back to your question about protein,
Mm-hmm.
is that now when we're starting to think about protein, you want to be so well above that foundation, that basement, so that you can age well, right? And so what we're looking at now in the data is that it's typically going to be higher than 1.2 grams per kilo. And when we look at this recommendation of 1 gram per pound of body weight, you have to do a little math here. So you'll remember that there are 2.2 pounds, or 2.2
Kilograms.
pounds in a kilo, right?
Yeah.
So what we're seeing with muscle protein synthesis is that there is likely an upper limit of 2.2 grams per kilo, which translates into 1 gram per pound, right? And so in that sense, we're seeing that if you are strength training, this is critically important. You can't just eat protein and expect to get big, strong muscles. If you are strength training, it is likely that 2.2 grams is kind of the upper limit. So you want to be somewhere in between there, 1.2, 1.4, 1.6, up to about 2.2 grams per kilo.
Yeah. So you're still, kilo. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Which then if 2.2, if you're saying then up to 2.2 per kilo, that's about that 1 gram
1
per
gram
pound.
per pound. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's where it came from.
Yeah,
1 gram per pound.
Yeah, 1 gram. So you are a believer of that. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So we are learning a lot more about this right now. So there was a fascinating study that came out, probably about 6 or 8 months ago, that kind of rocked the entire protein nutrition world. It was a study out of Luc Van Loon's lab, really prolific researcher on muscle and protein. And what he did is he gave a bunch of admittedly young men, right? 100 grams in one sitting, right? So that's a ton of protein to eat. Yeah. And they were asking the question, can you use 100 grams in one sitting? Traditionally, we say in nutrition, eat 20 or 30 or 40 grams and kind of pulse it throughout the day. And so in this study, they found, yes, not only can they use those 100 grams, but they'll use it continuously afterwards. It came from a casein supplement. And so now we're learning that not only do we need more protein, but also we can use big, massive amounts in one sitting. So it goes right back to your point of personalization, is how can you get this protein in, and how does it make sense in your day-to-day? And let's get it in because you really need it. And I'm going to double tap on this. Also strength training, because again, you can't just eat protein. You've got to stimulate that muscle so that it can use that protein.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're going to get to strength training. Don't you worry. Lots of questions with strength training. But first, I was really curious where you fell with that, with the amount of protein, because obviously I am complete agreement with you that 0.8 per kilogram is the absolute minimum. And just so everyone understands too, it's 0.8 to 1.2 per kilogram was the old recommendation. I was giving the lowest of the range of these older recommendations, which many people still agree with. The higher end of that range, again, is that 1 gram per kilogram, which again, just to stay consistent here, would be 2.2.
I think this is actually, you're pointing something out that I think is critically important, is in the United States, it doesn't even register to us. Grams per kilo is not an actionable resource. It's not a label that we have any kind of, touch point with, grams per kilo. We don't deal in the metric system, right? And so it's really hard. So that's why, thinking about this 1 gram per pound can be really helpful. Because
I totally agree with you. One thing that always bothers me is when I'm reading something meant for consumers and it says, let's say, to have 20 grams of blueberries, or people have no idea what that means. You have to speak in a way that they can understand and relate. So having a half a cup of blueberries or a cup of blueberries means something to someone. So you have to speak in terms that people understand. Otherwise, there's no ability to apply the information. So
and you're saying something that's just so important right now. And even independent of people that are just sort of like wellness consumers, this is a message that's critically important for scientists, for dietitians, for healthcare providers, is we have to speak the language that people understand, especially with nutrition, because it's so critically important. So, I always say, this is terrible, but I say it anyways, like scientists suck at social media, right? Like we're actually really bad at it because we speak in units that people don't understand. We speak in nuance that people don't understand. And so this is why making a really clear, actionable message, especially around something as essential as protein, is really important so that people know what to do with that information.
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump off from there to just continue our conversation on protein for a minute. So when we're talking, and we just had that conversation about how much protein you recommend. I'm with you there. I recommend for most people, again, it's personalized. It will depend. I think a gram per pound for some people can be difficult to meet. I think that I do run into a lot of people, especially people that aren't training adequately. It's hard to meet it. So I always say, like, aim for, let's say, 0.75 to 1 gram per pound of body weight, and see how you feel. And then you just have to be even more careful about getting nutrient dense foods, so that, or more intentional, I should say, about getting nutrient dense foods so you are getting everything in there. So I aim for that 1, but 0.75, you're still doing a pretty good job for most people. I don't know if you agree or not, but that's where I kind of shoot for many people to do that. But the other thing that I wanted to note, based on what you were just saying, talking in terms of things that people understand, when we say a gram of protein per pound of body weight, we're talking about ideal body weight. So if you are 30 pounds overweight and looking to lose weight, you're aiming for your ideal body weight. So you might think, how am I going to get 160 grams of protein in? Well, you might really only need 120. So it's maybe 120 is your ideal body weight. Maybe it's 130. Let's say 130. So if you're 160 pounds and 130 is your ideal body weight, you want to be thinking about getting 130 grams or 0.75 times 130 versus 160 grams. And I think that is important, because I think for some people, it just seems like so much, especially if they want to lose weight. It feels even scary to get in that amount of food. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, 100%. I'll take it one step further, and this is the way that I work on it with people. As I say, if you can get somewhere around 100 grams a day, you're nailing it.
Yeah.
Right? Like it is actually quite challenging to get 100 grams per day. To exactly your point, is you don't want to just be eating protein, right? So you also want to be eating high fiber foods, which are going to be really satiating and really filling, right? You want to make sure that you're getting all these other nutrient dense foods in. And so I pretty much say, if you can get somewhere around 100 grams, like at the end of the day, if it's 110 or if it's 90, like I'm happy with that, right? Like you're moving in exactly the right direction. And then to your point, we can get a little bit more precise. So let's say you have a goal of increasing muscle mass, or you have some kind of, body composition goal. We can start to get a little bit more precise, but I say start with trying to get as close to 100 grams per day as you possibly can.
Right. And then if you did the math, it probably equals about 0.75 to 1 for most people. So yeah, we're saying the same thing. You just simplified it even further, which I love. Yep. And then something that you mentioned before also, getting it, when you brought up that study, I always try to get people to eat it consistently throughout the day, so that you're not getting it all in that one place. I mean, although you're saying that the science is changing and that you can get it more at one time, but I like people to have it throughout the day for blood sugar stabilization, for being able to actually get it in. It's hard for people to eat that much at one time. Also, so that they're eating a variety of protein too. So usually you get more variety when you're eating at different times. And also then you're also usually coupling it with other foods. So then when you're getting those other foods, you're also getting in other nutrients. And then also people like to eat. So eat throughout the day.
I totally agree. And I think that, that is the reasonable way to go about it, is to eat pulse throughout the day. I only brought that other study up to just sort of say, like, there is, this sort of, I think, and we all believed it. And this is something that's really important, that research keeps us, learning and investigating and understanding new concepts.
Absolutely.
We used to say you have to pulse it throughout the day. It was like way back in the day. Do you remember we used to say, you have to eat several small meals in a day so that you don't, blow up your metabolism. And it's like, well, we've learned that that's probably not true either. And there's all this data on time restricted eating and everything.
Mhm.
And so knowledge evolves. And so I think this goes right back to your point that's really important is the 100 grams at the end of the day, give or take 0.75,
Right.
is
You don't have
the
to agree on
goal.
that, by the way. That's just a way to help people
No, no,
get it in.
I think we totally agree on it. I think what's really important is, how can you get it into your day is going to be really personalized. And I love that you always take that approach, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, the sort of general recommendation for all of the things that you mentioned, blood sugar stabilization, making sure that you're satiated throughout the day, pulsing at 30 to 40 grams throughout the day can be really helpful for that. And if you're like, shoot, I can only get, 2 times of protein into today, you don't have to tie yourself up in knots and feel upset that like you're not doing it perfectly right, as long as you
Exactly.
sort of hit that end goal.
Yeah, it's such a good point that you're bringing that up too, because again, you have to do things and put things into action in ways that are going to be realistic for your lifestyle. So I agree that is good to know for people that might
Yeah.
not be able to eat more than a couple times a day. Yeah, great information. Thank you. Always bringing us the most cutting edge research. Okay, so let's just talk about protein a little bit more. How do you feel about whey, casein, animal protein, plant protein? What's your favorite way to get protein? I know you're going to say whole foods, but aside from whole foods, let's get a little specific about the type of protein you like to get in.
Yeah, totally. So obviously this is a really hot topic, really controversial right now. There's,
Yeah.
Camps that are like, you have to get it from animals. There's camps that like, you have to get it from plants. There's, people in the middle that say you can get it from both sources. I'm in the middle. I say you can get protein from, across the board sources. Plants are going to be more challenging because they are less abundant in protein. So you just don't get as much in one bite. The beauty of eating an animal-based source is that in most sources, you're going to get all 9 essential amino acids in one bite. And just to be clear for people that don't know that term, essential in nutrition means that you must eat it because your body can't make it. There are 20 amino acids, 9 are essential, so you have to eat those 9. It's easier to get it in animal proteins because they contain obviously a significantly larger concentration of those amino acids and the 9 essential. You can get it across the board. You just have to be really intentional about where you are sourcing from and making sure that you're keeping track.
I agree with everything you just said completely. And I think people get really cut.
That's why we like each other, Keri.
Yes,
This is why we get along.
yes, realistic. We are just realistic. I love this. And we see eye to eye on so many things here. I always think, listen, we could break things down and say, whey is going to do this for you. Casein's going to do this for you. Leucine's going to do this for you. We can get into all these like specifics, right? On the types of protein and the amino acids, the specific amino acids. But at the end of the day, people have to get it in a form that they enjoy, that agrees with them, and that they can, again, they could just get it in however it might be. If you hate protein powders and the only way you're going to get a protein powder is through whatever, a pea protein, and you hate that, like you're not going to have that. If you're, you have to get things in the way that works for you and that you enjoy. And I also think that for the majority of people out there, they just need to be doing a better job with their protein, that getting into the specifics is less important. The amount of people that are at a place where they need to up level and focus on the exact type of protein are already doing a really good job.
Agreed.
I think that you and I are probably more focused on the large majority of people out there that need to just up their protein. Yep. And up the quality of the food that they're eating. So focusing on that first is going to be enough for the large majority of people.
Could not agree more.
And then you have to think like, what bothers you? You might not tolerate this type of a protein. You might enjoy this type of a protein. I can tell you, I eat animal protein, plant protein. I love both. Point being that you can absolutely meet your protein needs if you're vegan. It is a lot harder. I also think it's like what satisfies you. How good do you feel eating different types of foods? So,
did you know that there is one phase of sleep that most people fail to get enough of? And
And this one phase of sleep is responsible for most of your body's daily rejuvenation, repair, energy, and controlling hunger, and even the hormones that affect our weight, and so much more. I'm talking about the deep sleep phase. And you probably know by now that sleep deep is a pillar of a nutritious life. So there you have it. It's for good reason. You probably also know that I'm a little sleep obsessed, not with sleeping a lot per se, rather with getting good quality sleep, because I've been a not so great sleeper most of my life. And when I sleep well, I feel like I can conquer the world. And when I don't, well, not so much. So why don't most people get enough of this one most important phase of sleep? A big reason is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population is deficient in magnesium, and magnesium increases GABA, a neurotransmitter which encourages relaxation on a cellular level, which is critical for sleep. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response system. Those with magnesium deficiency usually have higher stress levels, which negatively impact sleep as well. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most products out there only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough. I used to just take magnesium at night, but now I take it at night for relaxation and sleep, and in the morning for brain function and stress management. Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind and help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. The deep sleep benefits are really noticeable. I track my sleep. You may see me post this on Instagram, and I can tell you I see and feel the difference. For an exclusive offer, go to buyoptimizers.com/NL Keri and use promo code NL Keri for 10% off any order. I'll also put that in the show notes.
I'll tap into that a little bit deeper as well. I am absolutely pro like protein supplements, right? Here for it. Whey
Me too.
protein. Yeah. Any of the bars that people have. Again, this goes to, we have to, the goal is to get the protein in, right? So for some people, eating a lot of protein throughout the day, it's just a lot of food. It's a lot of volume, right? So if you're a small person and you need 100 grams of protein, that can actually just feel like an awful lot of food to eat, like just straight like volume size, right? And so something like a protein shake or a protein bar, great, like super awesome. Get that 20, 30, 40 grams in. I like to say, and I say this to my athletes and to my high performers, is that it's not a protein bar, it's not a protein shake unless it has 20 grams or more. So that's kind of like the threshold for me, as I say, like you can have a snack bar or something. If it's got 10 or 11 grams of protein, I wouldn't call it like a high protein source. So that's my one thing that I tell people. But the other thing, I actually do want to tap into this idea of vegan versus omnivorous diet. And for the record, I am 100% in favor of whatever dietary pattern that people want to follow. But there was a really interesting study that came out literally 2 or 3 weeks ago that looked at young women. And they took these young recreationally active women. So they were somewhere in their 20s and 30s, and they had them on a diet that was omnivorous for a couple of weeks. So they were eating plant foods, they were eating animal foods, and then they switched them to a vegan diet. And the way that this study was really interesting, it was very real world, where they were getting coached by a dietitian to say, this is what's on the vegan diet, this is how you should choose your food. And what they noticed is that after several weeks of being on the vegan diet, the protein concentration went down significantly. And they also saw decrements in skeletal muscle mass over a couple of weeks. So I am, again, all in favor for people being on the dietary pattern, including vegan, if that's what's your choice. However, do recognize that it can be quite challenging, even if you are being really intentional to get enough protein to maintain skeletal muscle mass.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I was saying it in the sense that it is possible. It is absolutely,
it's possible, 100%.
It is absolutely more difficult. I completely agree with you there. And I also think it's more difficult for many people, and I would fall into this camp, that it's more difficult just to be satisfied. I
Yeah.
think if you don't have any animal protein, it's really difficult to be satisfied. And what ends up happening there is then you sometimes end up eating foods that are just not nutrient dense to fill
Mm-hmm.
up. Now, again, you just have to, it's sort of another place where you need to be even more intentional again. It's not just, okay, I need to be intentional getting in my protein, but then, okay, now I'm not satisfied. What else am I going to have here? And being intentional that you're putting in a good quality, nutrient dense food into your body and not just having, some snack food that's vegan, but doesn't have any nutrients in it. So I think there's just multiple challenges that come up. Again, it can be possible. It's more challenging. Personally, I love some good quality animal protein with a whole lot of plants in my diet. I mean, that's how I eat. Good quality, high quality animal protein and a lot of plants. I mean, that's what I love, and a lot of healthy fats mixed in there, which anyway, okay. So let's get on to strength training. We already
Mm-hmm.
touched on sarcopenia a little bit. Let's talk about sarcopenia, and let's also talk about sarcopenia as it relates to midlife and estrogen decreasing, and lots of questions on strength training specifically. So I guess let's just talk. You already mentioned that our muscle starts to decline after the age of 30. So let's just go from there. Let's pick up right there.
Yeah. So that, just as a statistic, is sort of like on average in the general population, right? The good thing is, and the good news is, you can avoid this, right? So that is, I think, really important, is that if we don't address it, things are going to go sideways. But with protein, as we were talking about, and a healthy overall diet and strength training, we can avoid this decline in skeletal muscle mass. So you just mentioned a term, and we've said it a couple of times, but I think it's worth sort of defining, is this idea of sarcopenia, right? So sarcopenia, and this was, the lab that I was in when I was at Tufts, was the Nutrition, Exercise, Physiology, and Sarcopenia lab. Sarcopenia is muscle wasting with aging. And so when we look at muscle wasting, you have two things that happen. First, your muscle gets smaller, which is problematic, but also the composition of that muscle starts to unravel.
Mm-hmm.
So we see with sarcopenic muscle is that we have changes in fiber type. We have infiltration of fat where it shouldn't necessarily be. That's called ectopic fat, right? So fat in places where your body really doesn't like it. And when that happens, it causes massive inflammation. And we know that massive chronic inflammation is also really bad for other disorders and diseases that happen with aging. The other thing that happens that's really interesting with sarcopenia is because that quality of muscle has started to decline, we see challenges with metabolism. So you mentioned just a moment ago blood sugar regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Your muscles are a major user of sugar and fat for fuel. If we start to see that muscle decline, then you're automatically going to have dramatic effects on your metabolism, which can be problematic for insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So they all fit together. This brings me back to your 20s and your 30s and what you can do about it to avoid that progression to sarcopenia. Number one, I'm going to tap back in 100 grams of protein, right? Like, let's get that on board. But in order to use that protein, you got to flex your muscles quite literally, right? And so the way that we are starting to look at this now is strength training. And you and I will take myself back to Bally's. Way back in the day, we were advertised too that we should be in step aerobics classes and we should be doing, the yoga and the Pilates and all of these things. And those are great. They're awesome. I love that kind of exercise, and any exercise is good exercise. But strength training, resistance training we are recognizing critical for maintaining that skeletal muscle mass throughout your older years. 2 times a week is kind of like the bare minimum. Get 30 to 45 minutes of strength training, full body strength training, and you're already head and shoulders above any, person that's not doing that strength training. We can get nitty gritty onto other things that you can do around there, but simply lifting an external weight is going to be one of the best things that you can do to avoid sarcopenia and these declines of skeletal muscle mass with aging.
So my first follow-up question to you was going to be how many times a week? So you just answered that and you said 2. So minimum of 2. Okay. So my next question is, how do you feel about body weight workout versus using weights versus using machines?
Great question. I would say first, and this is kind of like the right answer, is do whatever thing that you're going to be able to do for the long term, right? So this goes along with diet too.
Right. So again, it's you got to be realistic and you got to do what you're going to do, right? Okay, totally.
Pick the one you love. Pick the one you love, because if you hate it, you're going to stop doing it, and if you stop doing it, you're back in the same place that you started. So I would say first things first, find something that you really love and do that. However, if we're going to get nitty gritty on it, one of the things, and this is where I did my early research at Tufts in the sarcopenia lab, is looking at power training. So this is, when we think about power, we're thinking about moving something heavy fast, right? So you can think about, plyometrics, which is body weight. You can think about, power lifting is kind of the far side of that. So that's, those Olympic lifts that you see in the gym. And then there's a whole host of things in the middle, right? And what we're seeing, particularly with women, is that power training can be very important because it trains these type 2 muscle fibers. You see these declines in the type 2, those powerful muscle fibers in women in particular as we get older, because we are kind of aerobic machines, right? Like we can go and do aerobic work, that zone 2 work we can do forever and ever and ever. But the power stuff is the stuff that really starts to go away as we get older. So if you wanted to really optimize those strength training sessions, you would start to lift heavy weights and then start to figure out how to move those heavy weights quickly.
Which leads right into my next question, which was going to be, what do you consider heavy weights? We always hear heavy weights, lift heavy things. Yeah. And I know it's going to be different for different people, but where do we even begin? What is considered heavy?
It's a great question. So typically what you want to be thinking about with heavy is not necessarily the pounds that you're looking at. So not necessarily what the number is on the dumbbell or on the plate, but how your body is feeling moving that weight, right? Okay. And remember, the more you strength train, the stronger you're going to get. And so those numbers are going to change at the end of the day. So generally, when we think about this, we think about heavy being something that you can do for a specific amount of reps. So let's say you were doing a squat and you were doing 3x10 squats, right? What you want to do is when you get to 10, you want to feel like you can do like 2 or 3 more. Right? So if you feel like you could do 2 or 3 more, you're right in that zone. If you are absolutely gassed and you're like right at your edge on that 10th rep on that 3rd set, you're probably lifting a little too heavy. Although you could work with a strength trainer and they could design a nice periodized program for you. We can get really nitty gritty with that. But just on average, if you feel like you've got 2 or 3 more in you, you're hitting that sweet spot.
So you should be able to do 3 sets of 10 where you feel like if you had to push yourself to go a couple more reps, you could.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right.
Okay. That is really actionable for people. I love that.
Yeah. And the reverse is true. If you feel like you can do 5, 6, 7 more, it's not heavy enough.
Okay.
But this is really interesting. All right.
I'm so excited.
This is really interesting. It also has to do with light weights as well. So I'm sure, have you ever taken a bar class? You've probably taken a bar class, right?
Yes, I have. Okay. Absolutely.
So when you go to a bar class and they make you do that like little leg lift for like 9,000 hours,
These
right?
are not my favorite types of classes. So that's why I hesitated with the yes, I've been there, not my favorite.
So again, that's actually really good information, right? If I said to you, you got to start going to a bar class, Keri, you'd be like, I don't think that's really my jam.
My thing, no.
Yeah. So let's say you've been to a bar class. You know that feeling, right? Where you're just like shaking at the end of that. That also applies to muscle building. So the idea here is not necessarily that it needs to be super heavy. It needs to be that you are taking yourself close to your edge. Brilliant study that was done
So you're saying that would be just as effective. So for someone that doesn't want to lift weights, doesn't go to gym, but loves their bar classes, that could work for them. Okay, that's also really important for people to know.
Super fascinating. So Stu Phillips did this study. He's this brilliant protein and muscle researcher in Canada. And he did this study where he looked at, again, it was young people. So, generalizability is challenging, but I don't understand why this wouldn't go to everybody. Basically, he figured out that if you do, let's call it 2 by 100, let's say you were doing bicep curls, right? And you were massive and you could just do 2 huge bicep curls with 100-pound weight. And you were just like, I can't do another one, right? I'm at failure. That seems to have the same effect on muscle as doing 2 pounds times 100 reps.
Oh, wow.
As long as you come close to failure. Yeah.
So coming close to failure is the important point, less so than the weight or the reps.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So you basically you want your muscles you want to exhaust your muscles, basically.
You want to exhaust your muscles. That's exactly.
I like that. Yeah. And that's really understandable for people. So I like that. Yeah. I do think that people get intimidated. They hear, I have to get my protein in, I have to do my strength training. Okay, protein, I can eat. I get that to some extent. Yeah. But what about strength training? Where do I begin? How do I do it? So this is really, really helpful for people. I like this. What do you think about, I want to have the conversation about overtraining, because I think also, again, now I'm talking about a specific, I think many different people can overtrain, but I think specifically when people are trying to lose weight, many people, again, now I'm talking about specifically midlife women trying to lose weight. They've gained weight, maybe late 30s, early 40s, or maybe for some people later in their 40s, but whatever, they're gaining weight, their hormones are changing, estrogen is decreasing, and they're noticing they've gained some weight in their midsection. What do they start doing? They start restricting calories and over-exercising. We know that is the absolute worst thing that you can do for your body. It is stressing your body. You're increasing your cortisol levels. It's damaging. We also know that exercise causes stress in our body, and a good type of stress. I know that we talked a little bit about this at the Nutritious Life Masterclass, but I'm sure most listeners were not there. So I want to have this conversation again, because I think you explained it really, really well. Just the marriage between the perfect amount of exercising without over-exercising and that good stress that we need in our bodies.
Yeah. You are tapping into a term that I love, this idea of good stress. So there's actually a scientific word for this. It's called hormesis. My suspicion is that hormesis is probably going to be one of the wellness buzzwords as we come into 2025 and beyond. And if you look at hormesis, what it generally means is just enough stress, not too much. And so when we look at exercise, it is a beautiful example of hormesis, where it kind of looks like this, curve where if you don't get enough and you're sedentary, that has all kinds of detrimental outcomes for your body. But if you're on the other side of that U-shaped curve and you do too much, it is also going to have detriment. And we see this in nutrition all the time, this U-shaped curve, right? Like you don't get enough, things can be bad. You get too much, things go bad too.
Absolutely.
And so hormesis with exercise, when you look at what exercise does to your body, if I was to describe exercise to you, right? And I didn't tell you what I was describing. If I said, hey, Keri, what I want you to do is this thing that's going to raise your heart rate, raise your blood pressure,
right.
Raise your core temperature, raise your cortisol levels, probably make you feel sore.
Create free radicals.
Exactly. You want to do that with me, Keri? You want to do that? Right? You'd be like,
no, I don't want to put myself at risk for chronic disease, right? Exactly. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Exactly. That sounds like risk for chronic disease. But what we're doing with just enough stress and not too much is we are training our bodies to manage these stressors. So by increasing my free radicals, let's say, my body is also going to increase glutathione and superoxide dismutase and all of these other things that are going to be really important for fighting that inflammation. So when I have some kind of external influence that raises those free radicals, I don't know, maybe I have been outside in a polluted area, or I am in a really physically, mentally stressful situation, my body is actually prepared to handle that because I've trained it quite literally in order to deal with these other external stressors. And also, what we see if we come back to muscle is when we damage that muscle, it's going to call in your immune system, call in all of those amino acids that you've been eating from your protein, and it's going to make that muscle stronger, more robust, more metabolically active and flexible so that you can survive long term without developing these other diseases that we know are related to
Right.
metabolism, like insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So, this idea of hormesis is critically important.
Yeah, so we're really like breaking down our muscles a little bit so that we have that reaction in our body to then let them build back up. But that's why you also need the protein and
Yep.
and other things like antioxidants, and also why we haven't talked about this at all, but why you also need things like sleep, where when your body is able to recover and put a lot of that good nutrition to work to then help even develop that muscle further, right? It
Exactly.
all really goes together.
And this comes back to your person that is, getting frustrated because they've got, some central adiposity, a little belly fat. They are, you know, going to these super high intense classes or working out really, really hard 6, 7 days a week. They're restricting their diet. It's literally the perfect storm to then have your body start to revolt, right? Because now it's saying, you're not giving me time to repair. You're not
Yeah.
giving me the building blocks that I need, and I am going to start breaking down. And this is where we start to see injury. This is where we start to see metabolic dysregulation, because you're not giving your body time to recover from the stress that you have induced, right? So this is where I like to think, everybody's in these camps right now. It's like, should I be doing high intensity interval training? Should I be doing resting, resistance training? Should I be doing zone 2? And the answer is yes, right? Like, you should be doing all of these things in a way that helps your body induce that stress and then recover from it. So this is why I like to think about it. I'm going to strength train, let's call it 2 to 3 times a week, right? I'm stressing my muscle out. I do want to exercise on those other days. So those are the days that I'm going to throw in some zone 2. I'm going to go for a brisk walk. I'm going to take a bike ride. I'm going to do something that's not super intense. It's going to allow my muscles to recover. And I'm also burning some calories, getting outside, enjoying myself, having a little time to, do whatever it is that I love to do from an exercise perspective. And I don't need to be super intense every single day, which I know is going to be detrimental.
Right. Now, how do people know if they're overtraining? Because I think some people get really scared. They say, well, I'm not losing weight. So why am I going to stop exercising? Why am I going to
Mhm.
reduce my exercising and eat more? I think it's
Yeah.
really hard to get people to understand this when they already feel like they're doing everything right by exercising every day and eating well. They think they're doing a good job. And I know you just explained that, but and the science behind it, but I think actually getting people to know that they're in that state
Mm.
of overdoing the exercising, maybe under eating, etc. Like, how do they know what would be happening aside from the fact that maybe they're stuck and they're not losing weight? What else? What are other things that they might notice?
Yeah, I think you are pointing out a really important mental pickle that people find themselves in a
Absolutely.
lot,
Hmm.
which is, I'm working so damn hard and I am not seeing the results that I
Yeah.
feel like I am putting the effort into.
Yeah.
So I think, as you just pointed out, like, that is indicator number one, is if you feel like you're crushing yourself and you're not getting the results that you're looking for, like, that is a key indicator that what you're doing is actually not working. So if it's not working, it's not working. So
Right.
that's number one. The others is, I think, we are in this world right now where we're constantly turning to external devices. Like, I wear an Aura ring, or there's, bands or whoops on your Garmin, right? And we're all like, everybody's obsessed over these metrics, right? Like, what
Hmm.
is my score? What is my, and I would say, let's start more simply, right? So there
Hmm.
are 2 metrics that I look at when I'm working with people to see if they're overtraining. The first is, are you sleeping?
Yeah.
If your sleep is impaired, you are probably overtraining. Impaired sleep is an indicator of stress,
Yeah.
right? So If you are super stressed, your core body temperature is going to be high. You're going to have a hard time falling asleep. You're going to have a hard time staying asleep. If that is where you're at right now and you're recognizing that your sleep is really dysregulated, that's a really key indicator.
Especially, I was going to say also in that waking up at 3-4 o'clock in the morning is a big one too, with cortisol being dysregulated and sort of soaring at that time of day versus later when you should be waking up.
Yep. And then the other piece that goes right along with that is resting heart rate. So this is one that I look at, and it's really easy to measure. Like, you can literally wake up in the morning if you don't have a device and check your pulse. Is if you're recognizing that your resting heart rate first thing in the morning is elevated, you're overtrained. Like, there is no better indicator to me than the resting heart rate. And this is where
So tell people what can they actually do, and what should their resting heart rate be?
Yeah. So resting heart rate for most people is going to be very individualized. On average, it's going to be first thing in the morning, somewhere between like 55 and 70, roughly. Okay. Right. So it's going to be really individual. So this is why you want to take it consistently to see if your number is changing. Right. Mm-hmm. So you can't compare your number to somebody else's. Yeah. It's very genetically driven. So first is just sort of like monitoring. If you're noticing, again, these two things are happening, you're waking up at 3 a.m, you're up and down all night, your brain is churning, your heart rate is high, you're probably overtrained. The other thing that I would honestly like start to avoid is looking at all of these metrics consistently if you already know that you're stressed, because you're going to look at it and be like, I know I'm stressed. Stop telling me I'm stressed. I know I'm stressed. It's like a vicious cycle. So I would say if you are also finding yourself in that space where you're like not sleeping, resting heart rate is high, take your bands and your rings off for a couple of days and take a deep breath, mm-hmm. Right? Like that is
I was going to say on that note, skip a couple of your workouts a week and do some meditation instead.
Yeah. Exactly.
Do some real meditation or some sort of breath work daily. Is obviously even better, but I'm saying actually skipping maybe a couple of those cardio workouts that you might be doing, or those HIIT classes, and doing some real meditative work.
It's like what you do for your computer, right? When you know your computer, you've had 7,000 tabs open, everything starts to slow down. Like your Zoom is skipping and nothing is working right on your computer. What do? You unplug it and you turn it off. Right? Yeah. You restart, you reboot it. It works for humans too, right? So if you unplug all of your stuff, mm-hmm. you take a few days off and you just say, I need a reset here. My body is screaming at me that I need a reset. That's the best thing that you can do, is take a few days off, even if mentally that like mental pickle where you're just like, that doesn't actually make sense. I want to be burning the calories. I want to be addressing, this little bit of belly fat. I want to be making sure that I'm, growing my muscle. If your body is screaming at you that it needs time to regenerate, you've got to give it to your body, or else you're just going to stay on this vicious hamster wheel and you're not going to be able to get off.
Yeah. Less is more sometimes.
Often.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I have so many more questions for you. Like I said, we're going to have to do a part 2, but let's get a couple more topics covered here if we can. Sure. Do you have a few more minutes? Are you okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay, let's talk about estrogen and sarcopenia. What is estrogen's role? Because we know as estrogen goes down, we become more inflammatory. We know we're losing muscle, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yep. So when we look at estrogen, and just for the record, I am not a hormone expert. I'm a muscle expert. So I look at it through the context of muscle, right? Yeah. When we were at the Nutritious Life conference, I followed up one of the sort of like preeminent, hormonal doctors in the country. And I was like, I'm going to talk about estrogen for a second, but I am not an estrogen expert.
No, it's all good. It's all good. You're talking about it from the point of view of muscle, and that's the point of view we want right now. That is the zone we are in. We are in the muscle and protein zone right now. It's all good.
So when we look at estrogen, we know during perimenopause and then after menopause, that moment when you stop menstruating, we see a rapid decline in estrogen, right? It goes almost down to zero if we're looking at it kind of like at a scale, a lifetime scale. And one of the things that we do know about estrogen is that it is anabolic and it is very protective of tissues in your body to make sure that they regenerate and are also, as you mentioned, sort of protected from an antioxidant storm, right? And so when we see estrogen decline, we also see that it is quite challenging to maintain that skeletal muscle mass, especially if you're not strength training. And so what we think about, and this is why it's important, and you're hearing about it now, is everybody's like, oh, when you're postmenopausal, it's so important to resistance train. Yes, it is critically important because that external stimulus is now the only way that we really have to enhance your skeletal muscle, make sure that the quality is maintained as you get older. But you don't want to start strength training at that moment of menopause. You want to think about that when you, again, you're 30 years old and you have not only maintained your skeletal muscle mass up until that, 51 or so years old is when menopause typically hits people. But you want to make sure that when that estrogen tanks, you've essentially got a reserve of muscle that now you don't need to build back up because it's going to be quite challenging, but now you can work to maintain that really rich, robust skeletal muscle. So, the saying is like, what's the best day to plant a tree? Like 30 years ago, but the second best day is today, right? I want to be careful that we're not sort of like saying it's not worth it to start strength training if you haven't been doing it when you're postmenopausal due. But you want to have that reserve if you really can. So I would say start strength training when you are a teenager. Like get your daughters strength training, get the 20-year-olds in your life, round up your girlfriends and get into a gym, right? But this is why strength training is so incredibly important when we are postmenopausal, because that anabolic drive is significantly lessened.
Right. And it's just, again, and we don't need to go down this whole road, but it is just another reason why people should look into hormone therapy as well.
Yes.
Menopause hormone therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of data, and again, this is not my wheelhouse, but there's a lot of good data as to how hormone therapy helps, independent of some of these symptoms that we're looking for alleviation for, hot flashes and, migraines and other things that happen during that menopausal transition, but it can be really beneficial for other things, including muscle.
Yeah. And I just know it's so frustrating for women, I think sometimes to feel like they're putting in this work and it's so hard for them to gain muscle. They feel like I'm working and I'm not gaining muscle. And it's generally a combination of these things: hormone shifting, maybe not getting adequate protein, perhaps not sleeping well, stress being high, perhaps not strength training properly. I mean, it's a mix of things, and you really have to look at all of these factors. But I think sometimes people don't they think, oh, hormones, I'm getting older. But for many people, there's something you can do about it. Right.
Yeah.
So again, that is a whole other conversation. We don't need to go further.
We have a round table on that one with all the
exactly. But it is just something to think about as it relates to sarcopenia and maintaining our strength as we age.
And you bring up another really, really important point that's a little bit tangential, but I think it's really worth stating, is we don't know a lot about women, about the menopausal transition, about, muscle with aging. When we look at the performance literature in women, females, 6% is done in females alone.
It's crazy.
6%. It's not only horrible. Crazy, it's maddening.
It is.
It's maddening.
Horrible. Yeah.
Like when we say like we never learned anything about our body, it's because nobody's been learning anything about our bodies, right? Like we have not put in the research dollars and the money in order to look at females, look at muscle, look at performance, look at this transition. You know why? Because it's hard.
Right.
Right. That was the answer. For
it's hard. Women menstruate. Their hormones are inconsistent throughout the month. We don't know what's happening, right? It's hard
to control for hormones. That was the answer. It's hard to control for hormones. And as a result, we didn't learn. I'll give you another really damning stat. 0.5% let me just say that number aloud again, 0.5% of brain data is on females.
That's just
Neurology data.
horrifying. Horrifying.
And think about what we're talking about here. Like when we talk about peri and postmenopause, we're talking about massive changes in the brain, in cognition, in all of these other things. So this is the part where I get on my little soapbox and I'm like, be careful out there, women, because people are making a lot of claims and they're trying to sell you a lot of things. And if they are selling you certainty and they're selling you products to help you through this transition, like just be really, really skeptical and cautious, because the unfortunate and damning reality is we actually don't have a lot of data. And so it's being filled, this vacuum is being filled with a lot of claims that are not based in evidence. We've got a lot of work to do.
I was just going to say, Rachel, you've got a lot of research to do.
Yeah.
Get back to work right now. We got to end this podcast. You got to go start us. Go back to that lab.
Yeah, 100%. We got a lot of work to do. So, and I think that this is, it's an exciting opportunity. We get to learn more about women, but also, scroll carefully, purchase carefully, because there's a lot of hype up there.
Absolutely. It's such a really, really important point, and why the work you're doing is so important. This was so good. I could talk to you forever. I was not surprised that I could talk to you that this was so good, and we could just
part two. We got to get it on the books.
We are going to do a part two, because I have so many more questions, but we have been going for a while now. I'm going to let you get back to that lab. No, I'm going to let you get back to work, but I am so grateful for your time. This was so informative, amazing. Always great talking to you. Last question I have for you. I mean, I think every listener can guess the answer here, but what do you do on a daily basis to ignite that nutritious life of yours, to sort of set in motion a nutritious life?
So I think the first thing is I am not super hard on myself. So I don't live the protocol life, right? Like I don't believe in it. I don't think that, like strictly following a protocol is helpful to anybody, because you are constantly changing, your environment is constantly changing, and it only sets you up for failure when you feel like you have not met those goals that some protocol or society has put on you. So the first thing that I would say is don't be super hard on yourself. The second is just try to be consistent. That's what I try to do in my day-to-day is I try to get some fruits and vegetables. I try to get some lean meats and proteins. And I try to make sure I also have cake, right? Like life must have joy. So that's the way that I approach this.
Rachel, I love this. I love this so much. And again, always seeing eye to eye. I love this. I would swap out cake for chocolate chip cookies maybe, but I'm right there with you. I always say patience and consistency, patience and consistency. I love the not being too hard on yourself, because also we know that would just increase stress, which would work, not the good type of stress, and that would just work against you. So I absolutely love that answer. Thank you.
You and I say a lot of the same things with a slightly different tone. I always tell people, this is because muscle is my thing, but I always tell people to flex their patience muscle. So I love that.
Yeah, so good. So good. Oh, so good chatting with you as always. And everyone, in the show notes, check out more on Rachel, where you can find her, all the good work she's doing. And again, thank you so much for being here, Rachel.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. Let's do part two.